questions, or one of the quick questions. How many people know who I am? You guys have heard me talk before, right? Okay, so you know what you're getting yourselves into. And for those of you that haven't heard me before, I am so sorry. So my talk is working together to make better themed park attractions across industry and academia. A couple of things before we get started. One is this. In the immortal words of Carl Sagan, I could be wrong about all of this. So if I say something that doesn't sound right, or you hear something that is wrong, raise your hand, and we'll talk about it. Second thing is this. I use profanity in public speaking for two reasons. One is that it's how I talk in real life, and I believe authenticity is super important. And the second reason is that I think profanity in public speech is kind of like garlic in food. A little bit keeps things interesting. If I say something that you are unfamiliar with, a term that you have never heard before, stop me, and we will go through it again. All right, so Martin mentioned that I am a computer scientist. This is my origin story. I did my undergraduate degree in computer science, and the summer before I started graduate school, I went to Disney's Hollywood Studios, and I waited for 2 hours in line for this ride called the Great Movie Ride. And every time I tell this story, I remember a couple of things. One is the sun beating down on my neck as I waited in that line. And the second thing I remember is how I smelled when I got out of that line. And I thought to myself, my God, there's gotta be a better way to do this. And so my idea was to write a computer program where you told the computer the rides you wanted to ride in a theme park. And the computer told you the order in which you should ride those rides to minimize your wait in line. So I went back to school. I did my graduate school at North Carolina A&T State University. It is the nation's largest, and I will say finest, historically black college. And my research advisors, my thesis advisors, had two questions for me. And the first question is, Len, is this problem hard? Is it worthy of a master's thesis? Because you're going to work on this for the next 2 years of your life. So it turns out that minimizing your wait in line at theme parks is an example of a well-known problem in math and computer science called the traveling salesman problem. And people study this for their entire lives. It's one of the most fundamental problems, in fact, in math and computer science. And it has wide applicability outside of theme parks as well, because companies like FedEx and UPS have to solve this problem every day when they're trying to deliver packages efficiently. If you think about it, you're the delivery driver, right? The customers you need to visit are the theme park attractions you want to visit. And the wait in line is the traffic between the customers. So my master's thesis expanded on the PhD dissertation of UPS's lead research scientist. The other question that my thesis advisors had was this. Besides you, Len, does anyone care about this? Because if you're trying to solve your own problems, that's called therapy. And it's way cheaper than graduate school. So it turns out that many tens of millions of people visit theme parks every year, and waiting in lines is one of their chief complaints. So I managed to do my entire master's thesis on this one area. There's actually one photo that exists of me doing my master's thesis. But this is it. This is me trying to explain the optimal route through the Magic Kingdom. And you guys might look at this and say, man, this is super complicated. It looks very intense. And I look at that and say, man, it was really easier in the days before Genie Plus and park reservations. I kid because I love it. After graduate school, I joined Bob Selinger, and I started co-authoring this book called The Unofficial Guide to Walt Disney World, because I was spending so much time in the parks. And over time, I grew to co-author other books on other theme parks, Disneyland, Universal, and also British theme parks, also the Disney Cruise Line. And we kind of think of Washington, D.C., the museums there, as theme parks as well, because there are narratives that go along with that. And there are a couple of interesting things about the book. One, we've sold 6 million copies of the book. It's the best-selling independent guide to most of these theme parks. And along with our website that Martin mentioned, touringplans.com, that gets around 8 million unique visitors a year. And hundreds of thousands of families pay for our digital tools before they go to theme parks every year. There are a couple of things that we focus on when it comes to the theme parks. One is we read every email that customers send in to us, either about the difficulties they're having in planning a trip, or the difficulties they encountered during their trip. And we look for ways to solve those problems that guests have. And we do that using science, technology, and data. And by data, I mean this. We've collected over 43 million wait times from theme parks in the United States. And I employ a team of data scientists whose job is to predict every day for the next year in 5-minute increments how long you're gonna wait in line for those rides. And when you combine it with my master's thesis, it gives you an efficient tour of the theme parks. And along with that, we've also surveyed our readers on numerous other things. So we have, for example, 2 million attraction reviews broken out by demographic. So we know how popular each ride is for any age group that you might be interested in. And we also have over 1 million restaurant reviews, mostly for Disney, but also some for Universal and other parks. And we get around 250,000 restaurant reviews per year just for Disney World. To put that in perspective, that's more reviews in 1 year than Yelp and TripAdvisor have combined over their lifetimes. So we have a lot of data. But data is only one part of studying theme parks, because if you think about it, the biggest theme parks, the biggest themed attractions, offer a wide variety of fields to study. This is my Venn diagram. I only have one math-related thing in this entire presentation, but basically this is the overlap between every theme attraction and every academic field. Anything that you could want to study, I believe, can be studied in a themed attraction. And that's true across all kinds of fields, whether it be art, or architecture, by the way, Martin, thank you for the info on the slide, to sociology and psychology, to food science, or to my favorite, queuing theory. Oh, can I just more quick? Super nervous! All right. So queuing theory is my favorite thing, and I've talked about individual disciplines, but I think most interesting questions are multidisciplinary. And here's a good example. This is a 10-hour wait in line for a ride at Universal Orlando called Hagrid's Magical Motorbike Adventures. And let's set aside the question of where you put a 10-hour line physically in a theme park. My question is, why are these people in line for 10 hours, right? And a lot of things have to go into making an attraction great to make it a 10-hour wait. Number one, you have to have a compelling story. But what makes that story compelling? That's an area of research, right? And what makes the characters in that story so appealing to different people, and why? Another area of study, right? Beyond that, there are questions of economics, right? People are spending time and money waiting in line. And also they're forming social bonds while they do it. And all of these are fertile grounds for study. The other reason why I like to study theme parks is because they reflect and influence the culture around them. Now, we all know that TV, music, books, and movies do this as well, but I would argue that themed environments do it better. Or as I like to say, once you've accepted the proposition of a flying elephant, you are open to suggestion on a lot of other things. But that gives the companies that create these immersive environments an incredible amount of power, right? The companies that run major theme parks are basically media empires. They are essentially nation states in their capabilities. And I don't mean that joking, I mean that literally. If you take the combined income of Comcast, Disney, and Blackstone, which I believe owns half of them, they would rank somewhere between Greece and Peru in terms of GDP, right? Now, I'm not saying that we need to scrutinize everything that these companies say, right? If I went to the president of Greece and I said, what are the best beaches in the world? She would say Mykonos or Corfu, and I would expect that, right? And if I went to the president of Peru and I said, what's your favorite food? And he would say something like, it's my abuelita's cooking, I would expect that, right? But if we looked at these governments and we said, hey, what are you guys doing about the environment? Or why are you enriching your ruling class at the expense of your workers? Or why don't you ever talk about your LGBTQ community, right? Those would be legitimate questions that we can ask of governments. And we should ask them of the companies that run theme parks as well. I'm not saying that the United States has invaded countries for flimsier reasons than that, because that would be England. But I'm saying that studying these sorts of things, thank you. One joke I wasn't sure was going to land. Right? But it's important to study these companies because of the power that they have. Right? One example I want to give, more. The point I want to make here is that every themed attraction has a point of view. And the question is, whose point of view gets represented? Sorry, let's skip ahead one slide. All right, so I point out in this slide that I have a photo of two dead rich white guys. This is a storytelling technique known as foreshadowing. But the other thing I want to mention is this. If you think about other services that theme parks provide, they influence society in ways that a lot of people don't think about. And I'm using bus service here from Universal as a specific example. If you think about the number of people who are in Walt Disney World on a busy day, it's roughly the population of Scottsdale, Arizona. And if you add Universal into that, it's roughly the population of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Right? And if you're an adult from Tulsa, Oklahoma, there's a decent chance that the first time you step on a bus at Universal, it's the first time you're using public transportation as an adult. And think about the influence that that has on public discourse. If you wait in line for an hour for the bus to come, and you don't have a seat, and the air conditioning is broken, and you arrive late at your destination, why, public transportation is an example of godless socialism. And you would vote against it every chance you get because you don't want your town to turn into an urban hellscape like New York City must be, right? But if it goes well, if the bus shows up on time, it's air conditioned, you get a seat, and you get a chance to focus on your family while someone else does the driving, then the next time you're in traffic in Tulsa, you might think to yourself, man, if Universal can do this, so can we. And you might be more apt to vote for public transportation. And I don't think this gets enough attention. By the way, is anyone here from Universal? All right, one person. Okay, I'll say this. If I had a nickel for every time Universal was having meetings with the title Intermodal Transportation Networks, now that they're building Epic Universe, we would all be rich. All right, so I've talked a lot about academia here. I want to do a little quick pitch to industry as to why they should work with academics. And for this, I have to thank my friend Martin, because when I was running through this presentation, I was not sure at all how I could present to industry. And Martin was really thoughtful. He teaches a class, obviously, in the business of running theme parks. And what Martin said to me was this. He said, Len, you've got to put yourself in the shoes of industry. You've got to understand their concerns. You've got to speak their language. And remember, business is fast-paced, so you've got to do it quickly. So, for my friends in industry, here is why you should work with academia. You like money, right? Because academics are some of the most talented people that you will ever meet, and they work for basically subsistence farming level wages. Somebody out there's going, yay, potatoes. But I mean that. When before I did this theme park thing, I was director of technical architecture for American Express, the credit card company. And anytime we were forming teams for different projects, I had two questions. One was around skill. Is the person who wants to work on my project smart enough to do the job? And the second question is, do they care enough to do a good job? And I would say that academia and people I've met who are studying theme parks outside of industry have both of those in spades, and it would be silly not to engage them. I'm going to give a quick example here. My friend Alexis Frenzies runs the psychology department at Elon University, and she teaches a class called The Science of Happiness at Disney. And every year, she brings down a class of students for 3 weeks, each of them with their own research projects in Disney World. And so one year, one of the students had this question, and the question was this: is there a gender difference in satisfaction when meeting Disney princesses? That is, do boys and girls equally enjoy meeting the Disney princesses? And the short answer is there is no difference. Boys and girls equally enjoy meeting Disney princesses. That was the answer of the research. But the larger question that came out of this, I think, is super important for industry, especially for companies that aren't as large as Disney and aren't as large as Universal. And here's what they found. If you ranked from 1 to like 97, the number of things that you could do in the Magic Kingdom, and you asked kids, preschool and grade school kids, what their favorite things were, it came down to 3 categories: character greetings, parades, and fireworks. There were only 2 attractions in the top 20. And that's super important for industry because it takes tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to build attractions, right? And character greetings are relatively inexpensive. And if you didn't know that, and you didn't work with industry, you may be spending money you might not need to increase guest satisfaction. All right, I've talked a little bit about myself. I want to go over a few groups that I think are doing some excellent research in the theme park area. First one's my friends at Furman University. They teach also an on-site class in Walt Disney World called Math and the Mouse. It is math and science focused. They'll do everything from touring plan stuff that I do to looking at which attractions guests go to when their primary attraction is offline. And interestingly, that varies by time of day and what else they've done. But they have some pretty extensive simulation capabilities, and they're very good people. Tons of academic interest, tons of research as well. I would be remiss if I did not mention my friend Martin, who again teaches a class in the business of running theme parks at Farmington. Martin's a great guy, and I am lucky to have him as my friend. Also, everyone knows UCF. I think they have one of the premier hospitality and tourism programs in the United States. It's basically them and UNLV that are the leaders, and then there's everyone else. And they do great work here. Thank you for sponsoring this symposium. I also want to mention the data science program at UCF. I've presented to them a couple of times. They are also theme park nerds and super interested in working with industry on a variety of topics. Over at MIT, there's 2 people I think you should know. The bottom one is Dick Larson. He is the nation's preeminent scholar on queuing theory. He is known as Dr. Q. And the reason why I love him is that he's still willing to answer all of my stupid questions about Big Thunder Mountain. The guy at the top is Eric Von Hippel, and he is interesting because I went to him 20 years ago with my idea for digital tools for guests in theme parks. And Eric wrote this book called Democratizing Innovation about how companies can look at their lead users and how those lead users are using their tools, and then figure out what those companies can do to market products to everyone else. And that was instrumental for me when we came up with our Lines application. I think it's changed, the way that we've done things. If you're a small theme park company and you're looking to build digital tools, you should definitely contact her. I mentioned earlier that all themed attractions have a point of view, and there are lots of ways to look at that. And these ways have changed over time. I'm using the example here of the American Adventure. When I first started writing the Unofficial guide, we would occasionally put smart-ass comments in the book like, hey, isn't it funny how in the American Adventure no one ever mentions who bombed Pearl Harbor? And we would get mail back from people who said, Len, I am going to a theme park for entertainment, not education. I don't want to hear about any of that stuff. But times are changing, and I knew they were changing when I got an email from someone who had done their senior thesis on the American Adventure, and it was Kristen. And she said, Len, have you ever noticed that in the American Adventure, it presents as solved problems like the environment, or race relations, or gender equality, or the role of labor. And we all know they're not solved, but that's how it's presented. Now I understand why Disney's not updating the entire attraction. This thing is a mammoth thing behind the scenes, and it would take a ton of money to update. But even if they added a tag at the end, or Mark Twain said something like, you know what, some of these are still problems today, I think that would go a long way towards making people understand that Disney understands what their concerns are. Because I think modern audiences want to see themselves and their concerns represented in theme park attractions. By the way, I'm not picking on the American Adventure, it could be worse. This is from the Buddy Baker archives at NYU. It's the actual original theme song to This Is America, the American Adventure. It includes the lyrics, Dr. Lawyer Indian Chief, liberated Mrs. Bikinis on the beach. I don't know why this didn't get into production. But we are making progress. I think the addition of Tiana's Bayou Adventure at Disneyland and Walt Disney World is a huge step forward in representation. And I say that as someone who really likes the Splash Mountain for the ride itself. The story, of course, is racist. It's a great ride. The other thing I think that Disney just did this recently is they've added kids in wheelchairs It's a Small World. And I was sharing this photo with my daughter, kind of running through the speech. My daughter just finished a master's thesis in women's and gender studies at Arizona State. And so I showed her this, look, Disney's being more inclusive. And she's like, that's fantastic. That's great. Where are the gay people? I want to mention a few other people. So the website studyingthemeparks.com has some really interesting research on how to study theme parks as text. That is, as stories that reference both other theme park stories and the external world. And I don't want to ruin Florian's talk because he's coming later, and I'm super excited to hear it. But if you think about really good theme stories, I think the best of them weave in fiction and nonfiction. And my favorite example of this is the movie National Treasure, right? The first time through National Treasure, you're going along for the ride. And do you honestly know what part of that is real, of that story, and what part isn't? I didn't, right? And so I think we can look at theme parks the same way. Again, Florian's going to talk later. I don't want to spoil it. The other group I think you should be interested in is Disney Culture and Society Research Network. These guys are super supportive. They not only do research on Disney, but if you're an academic and you're worried about things like imposter syndrome, they do research workshops on this as well. They are super active on Twitter for as long as that lasts. It's currently 10:27. Top of New York, that's what I'm going for here. Also want to mention the Disney Studies folks at PCA. They're doing a conference next year in San Antonio, and with an entire track on Disney theme parks. I am super excited for that as well. There's only a few topics here that I've listed. There are definitely many more, so definitely check them out. Also, Peter, who is the chair of this, is apparently the nation's preeminent expert on Donald Duck. And I got a chance to talk with him last week, and it was everything you thought it would be. Last thing I want to mention, my friend Bethany Bemis has written this book on Disney theme parks and the American narrative, and she's also the curator of an upcoming exhibit at the Smithsonian Museum of American History on Disney parks and American stories. That opens sometime in 2023, and I'm definitely going to make a trip out there to see it. It's a really academic look at theme parks, but also blends in things like family photos. So I'm super looking forward to that as well. All right, last thing I want to leave you guys with this. Next week is Thanksgiving for my friends in the United States, and I want to give you some support as you go back and visit your families. Because we all know that we get questions around the Thanksgiving table from that drunk aunt or uncle, like, tell me what it is you do for a living again, and when are you going to get a real job? And so I want to relate to you a story that recently happened to me on how to answer that. So I was recently did an interview with a major financial news network, and the interview spanned hours over days, and at the end of it, the reporter asked me this question. He said, Len, do you ever get tired of this? And I said, what do you mean? He's like, well, theme parks are fake. None of it's real. All of it's stories that we tell ourselves. It's not the real world, it's all imaginary, it's all ephemeral. Don't you want to do something in the real world, something that's real? And if I was a better man, I would have said something like this. My new friend, my dear colleague, I got to you today by sitting with a few hundred other people in a shiny metal tube that flew 30,000 feet above the air, Icarus-like. And I say Icarus because I flew Spirit. Icarus-like. Bending the laws of God and nature to our own will. Reality is what we say it is, and nothing more. But I am not that good, and I am not that eloquent, and I am not that smart. And so what I ended up saying was something like this. My brother in Christ, have you ever been to a museum? Because it's filled with shit that isn't real. And stories that we tell ourselves that never happened. And we call that art. And I'm not sure I can explain the difference. And if it's truth that you seek, my financial friend, if it is veracity that you're after, if it is the firmament of facts that you need to get through the day, man, do you know how the money system works? Because if not, I got some bad news for you. All right, that's my talk. Thank you guys for indulging me.